All right, state modeling. What's the purpose? Well, your modeling is used to describe and analyze the different possible states of an entity within a system. How the entity changes from one state to another, and what happens to the entity when it is in each state. Back when we were talking about scope modeling, we talked about where we are right now, or back when we talked about fucking prototyping, risk analysis, and process modeling, because the process is supposed to take us from A to B, right? Or A to Z or something. So state modeling is kind of like modeling how you want things to look in the future. And I also believe it's basically reflecting on how the state is now, and then kind of like having that kind of comparison or having that kind of information as well to see the difference between now and then. An entity is an object or concept within a system. Yeah, an entity may be used in several processes. The life cycle of every entity has a beginning and an end. In a state model, also sometimes called a state transition model, a state is a formal representation of a status that is used when it is necessary to have a precise and consistent understanding of an entity that has complex behavior and complex rules about that behavior. So it's the way they're describing it, it's a formal representation of a status. Like, where are we now? Like, we are right now in a place where only I exist. The future state, 5 people need to exist, right? I describe the state using the physical space. I could also describe, we're here right now. The state currently we're in is a state where the money coming in only supports 1 person, versus the state will be where the money coming in supports 5, right? And so you kind of like create the process to reach that state. What you're doing is you're clarifying between A to Z. So state model describes a set of opposite states for an entity, the sequence of states that the entity can be in, how the entity changes from one state to another, and the events and conditions that cause the entity to change states, and the actions that can or must be performed by the entity in each state as it moves through the cycle. So you kind of like go through, we're setting up the processes, we're setting up the sequences, we're setting up the possible states for an entity and the ones we want, right? Because like, ultimately the reason we're looking at the possibilities is because we want to see what we can do or what we want to do, or choose basically our desired outcome. And the event, the condition that cause the entity to change states, and the actions that can or must be performed by the entity in each state as it moves through its life cycle. While a process model can show all entities that are used, okay, 1 second, yeah. The actions that can or must be performed in the entity in order for us to move through the cycle. While a process model can show all the entities that are used and affected by the process, a state model shows a complementary view that happens on the entity across the process that affects it or uses it. Like ultimately it's a model, right? So it kind of has to have information about a whole lot of things that we're kind of like working with. What are the elements? States. An entity has a finite number of states during its life cycle, though it can be in more than one state at a time. But it's one of those. It can't be in more than one state at a time. Each state is described with a name and activities and could be an entity, okay, depending on the size of the entity, I guess. Could be performed while in a state. There may be rules about which activities must be performed. Think about it this way. If you're looking at an entity as a business, for example, and it has, for example, 3 departments, some departments could be in a finished state, as in we finished our side of the project, while other departments might be like, we're figuring it out. State transition, how the entity changes or transitions from one state to another, could be determined by the steps or a process, by business rules, or by information content. Man, it's like we go back to the same thing. It's like processes, rules, outlines, scopes. The sequence of states in an entity are not always linear. The entity skip over several states or reverts to a previous state, perhaps more than just once. We're talking about the abstraction of state here, right? Like, sometimes you do something because it's a seasonal thing. So like we're in a Christmas state right now. We do Christmassy things, and then we go back to the normal way we work. A transition may be conditional, triggered by a specific event or a conditional or a condition being reached, or automatic, triggered by the completion of the required activities while in the previous state or the passage of time. Like it could be automatic or it could be like literally, I don't know, we're gonna die if we don't do anything state. It may also be recursive, leaving one state and returning back to the same state. The transition is described in terms of the event that causes the transition, right? It's always like, what started this, or what was the needle of the haystack, or something like that. Coffee. A transition is described in terms of the event that causes the transition, conditions which determine whether or not the entity must respond to the event, and actions that occur in the association with the event. So the event, the conditions in which the entity must respond, what happened, how is it happening, and how should we handle it, and basically like, what are we doing while it's happening, or for it to be done. We have a state diagram. A state diagram shows the life cycle of one entity. Beginning with the entity first, comes to the existence and moving through the different states of the entity. Interesting. This is the entity, state 1, state 2, or state 3, final state goes to state 3. So like state 1 goes to state 2, and by state 1 and state 2, the state 3 comes up. The beginner and the end of the entity's life cycle are shown with special symbols of both the initial state. Think about more of a flow, right? Like I start basically thirsty and I end very, very like small. I start thirsty and I end quenched. That's the word, right? Anyways, the transition from one state to another is shown with one directional arrow pointing. This is it, basically. I'm not going to talk about it. This is it. Fuck off. But it's basically, it starts somewhere with a circle, and there's an arrow, and then there's a square, and like everything that leads to something else kind of like is mapped over there. Transitional diagram. State tables. A state table is two-dimensional matrix showing states and the transitions between them. Can be used during elicitation or analysis, or either an alternative, a precursor or a complement to a state diagram. It is a simple way to get started on a state model in order to elicit the state names and event names from the domain subject matter experts. What the fuck was this? Each row shows a starting state and transition at the end of the state. One state could respond. So like, I wish they gave us an example, right? But it seems like it's more, let's actually do it. State tables. BA state tables. It seems like it's just like a normal table where every row is kind of like when the conditions are met. It's a matrix where they go like tick, 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 yes. Images. All right. I wrote business analysis. What is a state table? Yeah, so that, as I expected it, it's more of a شو اسمه. No, fuck you guys. Sorry, my bad, my bad. All right, here it is. Are you still with me? Baby, don't go. Or where? Right, like present state, next state, output, and each one of them kind of like has its own, like, no. No, not this one. All right. I'm assuming this maybe works, right? State 1, state 2, state 3, and each state has different conditions, right? But how would it look like if we're thinking about it from a, well, I was thinking matrix, maybe I was wrong. But what I was trying to do is I was trying to imagine if there is a اسمه. It has two-dimensional matrix showing states and the transitions. So state 1 and what needs to be completed for us to move to state 2, right? It can be used during elicitation analysis, either alternative. We fill it beforehand in order to understand how the future states would look like. A state that appears as an end state in one row could be a start state in another row. Right? Like, that's what they're kind of saying. I don't know why I'm not getting it, or I got a bit confused in it, or I wanted to create a visual out of it. But I think that's the case. Okay. What are the usage considerations? Strengths. It identifies business rules and information attributes that apply to entity being modeled. It identifies and describes the activities that apply to the entity at different states of the entity. It is a more effective documentation and communication tool than plain text, especially if the entity being described has more than a few states, transitions, and conditions. What are the limitations? So it does good, it explains better, it identifies more in a more visual way, because then you can look around you and you can see the state you're in and you could be able to imagine the state later. And what about the limitations? It's usually only used to understand and communicate about information entities that are perceived to be complex. Simple entities may be understood without the time, and entities here is not basically a business. It's like, it could literally be a small table, right? Like, you know, the difference between a small table and like a fucking wedding hall, right? Like the wedding hall is an entity and the small table is an entity. When it comes to a small table, the transition basically, like, you know, clean it is not that big of a deal. But to clean a house maybe like actually has a lot of like, wash this, upload this, move this, vacuum this, wipe this, right? There's a lot more factors in different entities. So like they're simple or not. Building a state model, to build this state model, you kind of like need a more complex entity. So build a state model appears simple at the start, but achieving a consensus among domain SMEs about the details required by the model can be difficult at a time and time consuming. A higher degree of precision about state. So time consuming, blah, blah, blah. It's not as simple as it looks. A high degree of precision about the states and transitions is required to build a state diagram. Some domain SMEs and business analysis practitioners are uncomfortable trying to describe such a level of detail. What? They could go fuck themselves. Why are they getting paid? BA! But anyways, yeah. So, and some of them basically kind of like need some expertise, and instead of hiring an expertise with a business analyst, give an expertise time to learn business analysis, and then they'll give you basically better decision. They'll model better states because they know what the fuck they're talking about, right? It's a lot easier for somebody to learn how to use a tool, like, which is basically now state modeling, to model a state and kind of like figure out now where we are and where we'll be going forward. If I was an engineer, then bring a business analyst that has to learn how to be an engineer in the process. That's it. Amazing. Love you guys.